All right, so today we're going to be looking at something that might seem a little bit heavy,
Yeah.
purity, temptation, overcoming the flesh,
Yeah.
all that good stuff. But stick with us on this deep dive because it gets really fascinating.
Absolutely.
You've been exploring faith and spirituality lately,
Uh-huh.
and we came across this podcast called Walking in Purity, Overcoming the Flesh.
Uh-huh.
And it offered such a unique perspective on these themes.
Yeah.
It draws really heavily on scripture and emphasizes this idea of holiness and resisting the lust of the flesh, which,
That's a big one.
sounds pretty intense.
It does. Yeah. But what's really interesting about this particular podcast
Mhm.
is how it uses this concept of the human body as a temple to illustrate these ideas.
A temple.
Okay.
Okay, now that's intriguing.
Right.
I'm very curious to see how they're connecting that to navigating temptation in the modern world.
Well, it's all about recognizing the inherent sacredness of the body,
Mm.
which then ties into this idea of holiness that the podcast really emphasizes right from the start.
Okay, so let's start there then.
Yeah.
What does this podcast mean by holiness?
So they define holiness as a state of being set apart, dedicated to a higher purpose, and connected to the divine.
Okay.
The podcast actually uses Leviticus 19.2, where Yahweh says, "You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy."
Okay.
So basically, it's about striving to live in a way that reflects the nature of God.
So it's not just about following rules.
Right.
It's about aligning yourself with something bigger than yourself.
Exactly. And while this concept is obviously rooted in a specific religious tradition, this idea of self-control and discipline as paths to a higher state of being
Mm-hmm.
actually resonates across various philosophies and spiritual practices.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's about recognizing that our actions and choices have consequences both for ourselves and for those around us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a pretty universal concept, I feel like.
Yeah.
But the podcast doesn't shy away from acknowledging that achieving this state of holiness isn't easy.
Right.
In fact, it highlights the constant battle we face against temptation,
Yes.
referring to it as the weakness of the flesh.
Mm-hmm.
And what I find interesting here is this idea of the flesh as this separate entity almost,
Yeah.
something we need to constantly struggle against.
It's a powerful image, right?
It is.
It's like that age-old struggle between our higher selves and our base desires.
Mm-hmm.
The source uses a passage from Matthew 26.41 where Jesus says, "The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak."
Right.
So it's about recognizing that we all have this internal conflict between what we know we should do and what we're tempted to do.
Yeah, it's so relatable. I think everyone's felt that pull to indulge,
Oh, absolutely.
even when they know they shouldn't.
Yeah.
Whether it's, that XT slice of cake or hitting the snooze button one too many times or
Right.
making choices we know aren't good for us in the long run,
Mhm.
We all experience this struggle.
Absolutely. And the podcast really argues that giving into these temptations, particularly what it calls lust of the flesh, can lead us down a path of separation from the divine and prevent us from living a truly fulfilling life.
Okay. So it's
So there are consequences
there are consequences, yeah.
to giving in.
Mm-hmm.
So knowing that we all face this internal struggle, right?
Mm-hmm.
What can we actually do to overcome it?
Yeah.
I mean, does this podcast offer
It does.
some practical steps to resist temptation and live a more fulfilling life?
Yeah.
I have to say some of them might surprise you.
Oh, yeah.
It's not all fire and brimstone,
Right. It's not about harsh punishments or restrictions or anything like that.
Right.
Instead, the podcast suggests this more kind of holistic approach.
Okay.
And it starts with practices like meditation, which,
Oh, interesting.
yeah, I wouldn't have expected that.
Right. It might sound a little unexpected in this context, but
Mhm.
if you think about it, meditation is really about quieting the mind
Right.
and focusing inward, which can help us become more aware of our thoughts and impulses.
That makes sense. I mean, mindfulness and meditation are having a real moment these days, even outside of religious contexts.
Oh, absolutely.
It's all about developing that self-awareness.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then, of course, there's prayer, which is about, seeking strength and guidance from a higher power to resist those urges.
So it's about connecting with that source of strength and wisdom that can help us make better choices.
Yes. And speaking of making better choices, the podcast also emphasizes the classic advice to flee from temptation.
Oh, yeah.
It's about recognizing those situations that trigger our weaker impulses
Right.
and making a conscious effort to avoid them.
Out of sight, out of mind, right?
See, exactly.
Like you knowing that you can't resist that bag of chips in the pantry.
Right.
So you just don't buy them in the first place.
Just don't buy them.
Sometimes the simplest solutions are the best.
Precisely. And finally, the podcast talks about walking in the Spirit. This is where things get a little more nuanced.
Okay.
It's not just about avoiding temptation. It's about actively cultivating a life that's aligned with your values and higher purpose.
So it's about being proactive rather than reactive.
Yes.
Instead of just trying to resist those negative impulses, it's about actively pursuing a more positive and fulfilling way of life.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay.
It's about making choices that nourish your spirit and bring you closer to that state of holiness. And I think that brings us back to that powerful metaphor of the body as a temple.
You're right. We touched on this earlier,
Yeah.
but I'd love to delve a little deeper.
Okay.
It's not every day you hear your body being compared to a sacred space.
Right.
What does this podcast have to say about this?
Well, the podcast uses a passage from 1 Corinthians 6.1-8:20, where Paul is urging people to flee from sexual immorality because it sins against one's own body.
Okay.
He says, "Do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit who is in you, who you have received from God? You are not your own."
Wow, that's quite a statement.
It is.
It definitely puts things in a different perspective.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And it's not just about avoiding specific actions.
Right.
It's about respecting and honoring our bodies as gifts from a higher power.
So if our bodies are temples,
Mm-hmm.
what does that mean for how we live our lives?
Right.
Does the podcast offer any practical examples of how this metaphor plays out in daily life?
It doesn't get into too many specifics,
Okay.
but it does emphasize the importance of making choices that reflect this idea of honoring the body as a sacred space.
Oh, okay.
So things like nourishing ourselves with healthy foods, engaging in activities that promote well-being,
Okay.
and even being mindful of the thoughts and images we allow into our minds
Right.
all become part of this larger picture of living in a way that honors our bodies as temples.
It's like a holistic approach to purity. It's not just about what you do, but also about how you think and feel.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that everything is connected. Our physical health, our mental and emotional well-being, and our spiritual growth.
That's a great observation, and it circles back to those practical steps we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Meditation, prayer, avoiding temptation, walking in the Spirit.
Right.
All of those things can contribute to cultivating a lifestyle that honors the body as a sacred space.
So it's not just about restrictions and rules.
Yeah.
It's about actively choosing to live in a way that nourishes and uplifts you, physically, mentally, and spiritually.
Precisely. And that's a powerful message regardless of your personal beliefs or background.
What strikes me is how this podcast, even though it comes from a very specific religious perspective,
Yes.
manages to tie together these ancient concepts with a more modern understanding of well-being.
Right, and that's what makes it so intriguing.
Yeah.
It takes these traditional ideas and presents them in a way that might resonate with a wider audience.
Right.
It's not just about dogma, it's about seeking a more fulfilling way of life.
I agree. And it definitely raises some thought-provoking questions.
It does.
Earlier, you mentioned how this perspective of the body as a temple might impact our relationships with ourselves and the world around us.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear more about that.
Well, I think one of the most significant implications of this concept is that it encourages us to view ourselves with more respect and compassion.
Okay.
You know, if we truly see our bodies as sacred spaces, we might be less likely to engage in self-destructive behaviors or to treat ourselves harshly.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like extending that same reverence and respect we would give to a holy place, to ourselves.
Exactly.
And if we can cultivate that kind of self-love and compassion, it stands to reason that it would also impact how we treat others.
Absolutely. If we recognize the sacredness within ourselves, we're more likely to see it in others as well.
Right.
It could influence how we interact with people, how we approach relationships, and even how we view society as a whole.
It's like this ripple effect of respect and understanding spreading outward. I love that.
Creating a more compassionate and harmonious world.
I love that image.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that we are all interconnected and that our actions and choices have far-reaching consequences.
You know, I'm starting to see how this podcast, even though it comes from a specific perspective,
Yeah.
has the potential to spark some universal conversations about self-respect, compassion, and conscious living.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that sometimes looking at things through a different lens can open up a whole new world of understanding.
Right.
It challenges us to think beyond our usual frameworks
Hmm.
and to consider new possibilities for how we live our lives.
Yeah, it's amazing how this podcast, Walking in Purity, has taken this concept of purity and expanded it beyond just a set of rules or restrictions.
Right.
It's become about a way of life, a way of being in the world that's mindful, respectful, and ultimately more fulfilling. And what's so compelling is how this perspective, while rooted in a specific religious tradition,
Mm-hmm.
offers insights that can resonate with anyone seeking a more meaningful and purposeful life.
Right.
It's about recognizing the interconnectedness of our physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being,
Yeah.
and understanding how our choices impact not just ourselves, but the world around us.
As we've been discussing this, I've been thinking about how this concept of the body as a temple could really shift the way we approach so many things in our lives.
Yeah.
It's not just about what we eat or how we treat our physical bodies. It's
Right.
about the thoughts we entertain, the energy we surround ourselves with,
Mhm.
the relationships we cultivate, even the way we interact with our environment.
Yeah.
It becomes about creating a life that honors and nurtures that sense of sacredness within ourselves.
It's a beautiful way to look at it, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that we are not just physical beings going through the motions of life.
Right.
We have this incredible capacity for growth, for connection, for something that transcends the purely material.
And that's what I find so inspiring about this idea.
Yeah.
It's not about denying our humanity or suppressing our desires.
Right.
It's about understanding that we are more than just our impulses.
Yeah.
And that by aligning ourselves with that higher purpose, we can actually experience a deeper level of fulfillment and joy.
It's about living with intention, making choices that are in alignment with our values, and recognizing that even in the midst of our human struggles,
Right.
we have this incredible potential for goodness and growth.
And perhaps that's the ultimate message of this podcast, Walking in Purity.
Yeah.
It's not about perfection, it's about progress.
Hmm.
It's about striving to live a life that reflects that inherent goodness within ourselves and recognizing that every choice we make is an opportunity to move closer to that ideal.
It's a journey, not a destination.
Yeah.
And I think this deep dive has provided some valuable insights and tools for anyone embarking on that path.
It certainly has for me, and I hope it has for you as well.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into walking in purity, we leave you with this.
Okay.
How would embracing the concept of your body as a temple change how you approach your own life?
That's a good question.
What choices would you make differently?
Yeah.
What shifts might you see in your relationships, your work, your overall sense of well-being?
These are questions worth pondering, and we encourage you to continue exploring these ideas and to see where they lead you.
Thanks for joining us on this journey, and we'll catch you next time on the Deep Dive Day.